Hey, welcome to our first accounting video. Okay, so these are the videos that are going to be on YouTube, and you can find me there, and I'll be talking about all the different things we're trying to cover in accounting class. So the first thing we need to cover here is the basic accounting equation. And this is the foundation of everything that we have in our pyramid of accounting knowledge. So at the very base, we have this accounting equation, and from there it just works itself up into this big pyramid of all the different things we can do. But when we wrap it all up, it still comes right back down to this equation. Okay? So we'll focus on one side and focus on the other and add all these details as we go, but we're still going to come down to this basic accounting equation. And you need to understand these three terms. So on this side of the equal sign, we have an asset. An asset is something of value. So a house, a car, a business, a multinational corporation, a truck, whatever, all these kind of things. So whether it's really big or whether it's really small, it doesn't matter. All the pens in the firm, all the way up to the whole real estate of the factory of the business. That is an asset. Something of value. That's what these are. Okay? So over here we've got two things to consider: liabilities and equity. So a liability is how much you owe. So if you were to buy an asset but you don't pay for all of it right at the beginning, then you owe some money and you have to pay that over time until you pay the full value of the asset, and now you've paid it off. So whatever you owe on that asset is considered a liability. You have to pay it. Now over here, this is called an equity. So equity has two meanings. In government, it means fairness, okay? But in the business world, and that's predominantly where it's used, it means ownership. So if you have equity in something, you have ownership of that. In fact, people will often call stocks equities just because stocks are ownership of part of a company, and they'll just say, oh, I'm going to invest in equities, and everyone says, oh, stocks, okay? Because that's ownership of something. So it's what you own. So equity is what you own. So if you have an asset, it's going to have some value. And if you don't buy it outright, then you've got to owe some money. Now, if you buy the whole thing, then your equity should equal your asset value. You just, if you have a house for $200,000 and if you have a house for $200,000 and you buy the whole house with cash, so you give them $200,000 cash, then you own the whole house because you bought the whole asset. All right? So you're going to buy a house. It costs $200,000. That's the value of this asset, and you give the person $200,000 cash. Then you own the whole thing, and you owe them nothing. All right? Okay, so that's what you need to understand. Now, another concept you need to take a look at before we go too much farther with this example is you need to understand this is an equal sign. And you're like, okay, yeah, that's like third grade. Yeah, but you got to understand what that equal sign means. It means this side must equal anything you put over here. So whatever you do over here, it's got to balance across that equal sign. Our equal sign is our teeter-totter, and you can't tip the teeter-totter out of balance. You have to keep it equal. That's our equal sign there. So if you're going to add something to this side, you've either got to take away something so that it goes back into balance, or you got to add something to the other side so it comes back into equilibrium. You can't let it get out of balance. So that equal sign is important. Just because you want to stick some numbers somewhere, you can't just do that. You've got to stick them somewhere, and you've got to balance it across the equal sign. Okay? So either you have two things on the same side going it's different sides to different directions. They could both go down or both go up, or on this side you have one go up and one go down. See, that would balance it, or one up and one down. That would also balance it. Okay? So that equal sign is very important, so we're going to keep our eye on that. All right. So here you go. This person went out and bought a house for $200,000 cash. They just put it down and they said, this is mine. I own this whole house. But most of us don't have $200,000 in cash just lying around. So what do we do instead is we go out and we get a loan. All right. Now, if we get a loan, that means we owe money. We owe that money to the bank. So we get a loan for $200,000. And now, if we borrow the full amount of the house, the equation looks like this. We have a house for $200,000, but we borrowed $200,000, so we owe that money to the bank. So how much of the house do we actually own? Zero. We have zero equity in this house. Okay? So it's kind of weird because now you've gotten the loan and you promise the bank, you pinky swear you're going to pay this off, and they give you the keys. Now, do you just like step in the door and that's it? Because you only own this little piece of the house? No, you got to walk around and use the whole thing. But as far as ownership or equity goes, you have zero equity because you owe the full amount of value of the house. All right? So if you were to sell this right now, you would sell the house for $200,000 because that's what it's worth, and you would hand the whole $200,000 to the bank because that's what you owe, and you'd walk away with zero. So you're probably not going to sell it just at the moment, okay? So let's say 10 years goes by. So in our example, we're going to have 10 years pass, and in that time, you have been paying money to the bank every month for your insurance, your mortgage, those kind of things, and it's been moving that mortgage down. The amount you owe is going down. And so you've paid off about $50,000 on your loan. Now remember, this is the basic accounting equation, and you got to keep it in balance. So we have an asset worth $200,000 here. Our liabilities went down to $150,000 there. Well, that's out of balance. So how are we going to fix this? The extra, it goes over here. All right? And so what you have now is you've paid off $50,000 of the loan. It's gone down, which means your ownership, your equity, has gone up because this has to stay in balance. So $200,000 asset is equal to $150,000 liability. That's not equal. To balance this, we've got to put that over there. All right? So what that's saying to you is, if you were to sell this house for $200,000, you'd pay the bank back what you owe, $150,000, and the leftover goes in your pocket because that's your ownership. You have equity in this house, and that $50,000 is yours. So after 10 years of paying this off, you walk away with $50,000. Now, for those of you whose wheels are turning, you're seeing, oh, Mr. Haight, is that why you invested in real estate? Yes, that's one of the reasons. There's 4 more ways you can make money with rental real estate, but this is one of them. Over time, you can pay off the loan, and you now own, you have equity in the house. So that means that you're going to get return of that money, however you want to phrase it. All right? So this house sells for $200,000 in 10 years. It hasn't gone up or down. We're making this very simple. And over here we've got our $150,000 because we've paid off some. So that increases our equity. our liabilities have gone down. At the same time, our equity has gone up. All right? Okay. So let's do another one here. What happens if in 10 years our house appreciates? What happens if it goes up in value? Okay? So 300,000 now is the true value of the home. We can sell it on the market for 300,000. Now you learn in economics that might be because of inflation, that might be because of money printing and the devaluing of capital assets. We're gonna save that for economics, but let's just say the value goes up to 300,000, okay? Because this is accounting class, we're looking at accounting profit, not economics. All right, so it goes up to $300,000 here. We go across our equal sign, our teeter-totter is now out of balance, and we've got $150,000 we owe to the bank. See, that hasn't changed. We borrowed this money, 200,000, we've paid off 50,000, but our value is 300,000. So where are we going to put this extra value? If the asset goes up, do we owe the bank more? No. We signed a contract for the bank for a certain amount of money, and there it is. And we owe them whatever we're paying that back. So what happened is if the value of this asset goes up to balance our equation, this number has to change. And now our equity, our ownership, is $150,000. All right? Wow. Okay? So buying a house can be a pretty lucrative investment. And that's what this is showing you. And if you were to communicate any of these things to anyone else, they would ask you, what's the value of your house? The real estate agent would ask this, and you'd say, well, let's take a look, and they'd compare it to other houses, and they'd say 300,000. And in your mind, you're thinking, I owe the bank 150,000. That means I don't have 50,000 equity. That means I have 150,000 equity. All right? Because we have to balance this equation. So if it goes up this 100,000, it means I own or have more equity in the house. Okay? So remember, at any point you can ask questions on the chat, and we can stop the video and I can answer those questions if we need to, and that's totally okay. So I want to say that for these first few videos to remind you. All right? So we don't have to go through the whole thing and then have you like, now what was that question again? You can simply type it in the chat. All right. So next thing here. A lot of houses have seen a lot of appreciation. Back in 2003 and 4 and 5, there was this huge run-up in house prices. Strangely enough, here we are again. There's been this huge run-up in house prices in the last few years. So, okay, we'll see what happens. What did happen in the early 2000s, 2003, 4, 5, and 6, is that banks started advertising, hey, why don't you take a home equity loan? So the banks understood that all these people had a lot of equity in their houses, and they said, hey, do you want to take a home equity loan? Remember, you see these words on TV, so home equity loan, now you understand what that means. So what they essentially did is the bankers said, hey, do you people want a bunch of money just to have fun with? Your house went up $100,000. So it's kind of like you just got $100,000 of free money. So what do you want to do with that? Do you want to put your kids through college? Do you want to take a trip to Europe? Do you want to, buy a flashy car? What do you want to do? And a lot of people said, hey, okay, I'll do that. So they sold their ownership back to the bank on their house. So now we're going to do a home equity loan. And if you go to the bank, they're going to call them a HELOC. And I can't remember all the words. Home equity loan, liability, organized contract, or something like that. But the main part you need to focus on is the home equity loan, the hell part of it. because that's kind of what they were. They are not very smart. All right? And here's what happened. So what they did is they said, all right, we're going to give you a loan of $100,000. So they would subtract $100,000 in equity. I'm selling part of my house. I have ownership in it, and I'm selling part of my ownership to the bank. So here we go. This is classic accounting things. You have a negative on this side of the equal sign teeter-totter, so to balance it, if we put another positive over here, 100,000 down, 100,000 up, this side of the equal sign, everything still balances. So what does that mean? That means that these people have now 50,000 in equity and 250,000 for a loan. Okay? So after doing this home equity loan, this HELOC thing that the banks want to sell to people, they got $100,000 in extra cash. Okay? So the bank gave them $100,000 extra in cash. They lost $100,000 in equity, and they gained $100,000 in debt. Now, the bankers always told people, and people believed them, this is part of the problem, that their house was worth $300,000. Therefore, hey, it's just like back to where you were at the beginning. Remember when you only had $50,000 in equity? See, it's the same, $50,000. So, see, you're not any worse off. Plus, you got $100,000. You took that great trip to Europe. You bought a new Jaguar. It's an awesome car. I mean, you bought a boat and a jet ski, and you just had fun. You went out to eat all the time, and man, you just burned through that $100,000, but you had a lot of fun. So that was 2003 and 4 and 5 and 6 and all those kind of things. All right? I remember this time period because I went to refinance one of my houses, and I said, look, it's at like 7.5% interest. Can I get it down to like 4% interest so I can refinance my house? All right? So this gets even weirder. What I did is I sold the house to myself. Okay? So I went to the bankers and I said, I've got a house worth a certain amount of money, and I've got some equity, but that doesn't really matter. What I want you to do is, I've got this loan at 7.5%. I want you to buy my house, give me a loan at 4%, and I will pay off the 7.5%, and I will now have a 4% loan, and I'll give you $2,000 if you make this happen for me. Let me buy the house from myself for a lower price. And bankers all over the country were doing it, and they said, sure, let's do this. And they said, now the problem is it has to come in for a certain amount of value. It has to appraise for a certain amount. And I said, well, I don't know if it will or not. It's kind of close. You know, I'll give it a try and see if it works. And I remember the banker, and he just picked up the phone right in front of me, and he said, hey, appraiser, go to this guy's house. He gave me the address, and he says, I want you to make it come in for like, you know, this amount, the amount I want. Make it 200,000. And he put down the phone. I said, did you just tell the appraiser what he's supposed to put the money value at? Not the actual market value? And he's like, yeah, we do it all the time. And I knew right there, oh my gosh, the market is rigged. So back in 2006, when I was doing this, I said, oh my gosh, this is all going to come crashing down. Because what the bankers were doing, and people were believing them, and everyone was going along with this, is this idea that they can just say what the value was. It wasn't the actual market price. They were just saying, hey, this is the value because we want it to be. And they were then handing out loans based on these values. So what happened in 2008, it was known as the Great Financial Crisis, the GFC. What happened is that people tried to sell their homes, and they weren't worth $300,000 anymore, or ever. Okay? their homes were really just worth 200,000. Remember, they'd always kind of been there, and that appreciation was false. So people were buying stuff at way high prices, bankers were loaning stuff at way high prices, and now people go to sell those homes, and all I can get for them is 200,000. Okay? The value is 200,000. Now remember, we got an equal sign here. That means these things have to balance. So, if this is 200,000 over here, and I've got 250,000 in liability that I have to pay back, I signed a contract that I have to pay $250,000. Got a mathematical problem here because 200,000 does not equal 250,000. What am I going to do to make this balance with the equal sign? And so what happened is people had negative $50,000 in their home. You say, how can you have negative ownership? Yeah, pretty crazy. So basically what that meant is they go to sell their house and they owe the bank so much money they would have to pay $50,000 just to be able to sell their house. So you can have a negative equity. It means you owe more money than the asset is worth. That's crazy. It's not a good situation to be in. In fact, this is called being underwater. So these people that did this, they had a fine trip to Europe, they had a great car, they had lots of fun, and they were dead broke. So, I had this happen where I live now. The people, they were trying to sell their house and they couldn't, and they were underwater by hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there they were driving a new Jaguar, and there I am in my old beat up Ford pickup. And I had more money than them with that pickup than they had with a Jaguar. It's really weird, okay? And they couldn't sell their house. I mean, they were like stripping out all of the electrical wiring and all of the ceiling fans were out, and they sold the wood stove, and they were just taking the thing apart. I mean, it was crazy because they had no money. If they were to sell the house, they would actually lose money to sell it. So you're trying to use this real world example so that you understand how these equations can move and fluctuate and rebalance. Okay? Because if this is 200,000 and that's the real market value, and you took out a loan for more than the real market value, you're in big trouble. You've got negative ownership. You'd have to give the bank an extra $50,000 to pay off your loan when you sell your house. So as an aside, what a lot of people did is they just took their keys to the bank and dropped it on the desk and said, I'm done. I'm not going to pay you anything because I can't get any money out of this. I don't even have $50,000 to give you. You can just have the house. I'm done. And then the banks had millions upon millions of people do that. And then the banks nearly collapsed because they had loaned out all their money and they couldn't get it back because it was all gone. It was spent on cars and trips to Europe and going out to eat. There was nothing left. It was all just pure consumption. So we had a huge crisis. A lot of people lost homes. A lot of people lost jobs. The stock market crashed. A lot of banks were going to go out of business, and then our government bailed them out. And there was a lot of protests about that. You can Google Occupy Wall Street. It was just people were pretty mad, and they probably should have been madder. But ultimately, who else should they have blamed besides the bankers? They should have blamed themselves. Okay? So you take too much money out of something just because you wish it's valued at a higher price. All right? So that's the lesson to be learned, and that's kind of the fun part of it. Otherwise, this is just some basic accounting equations. Every time you do something on one side, you have to do it on the other side. Or if you do something on one side, then you have to do the opposite thing on the same side. Okay? So if it's going to go down over here, it's got to go up over here, or it's got to go, yeah, down over there, down over here, or up and up. You got to keep that balance on that equal sign. So that's what we're taking a look at there. Okay, if you're a prudent investor, I feel like I've been prudent or lucky. You know, God's with you or whatever. My houses have pretty much done this right here. Okay. So I like to buy them for a low price. I like to fix them up. I paint them. I re-landscape them. Re-roofed the houses. So I've done a lot of house roofs. It's really hard. It pays off in the end with money, but my goodness, it's the most excruciating thing at the time. You know, but that saves me a lot of money. That improves the value on the house. And so if you can do that, you end up with a house that goes up in value, and that increases your equity, you know, and you end up with a lot more ownership. Okay? So hopefully that gives you an idea of the basic accounting equation.